One more. Let's get into it. Sold Not For Sale podcast. The women of The View often just kind of sit in an echo chamber of sorts and just say wild things off of a script. But in this episode, they actually talk to Coleman Hughes. So Joe Rogan and Coleman, they're going to talk about that whole thing. But Jamie doesn't pull up any clips of them actually attacking Coleman Hughes, because that is actually what they are doing. So I'm going to be showing you the Joe Rogan clip, of course. Then we're going to move on to actually showing what happened between Coleman and the cast, but mostly the person who attacked him the most and most viciously is Sunny Hostin. So I'm going to be showing you their exchange. He's defending himself a lot, so I'm going to show you some more clips of him actually talking more calmly about what he's trying to get across, and that's the fact of why are we as people focusing on race when we should be focusing on class. That's what should be happening, not making certain laws and affirmative action type things through DEI the thing that we focus on, but actually focusing on class and helping everybody who's disadvantaged, because there are poor white people, Hispanic people, brown people, black people. There is a whole class of people who are disadvantaged, and he wants to focus there. So I'm going to be playing Chris Williamson and Coleman Hughes talking about that a little bit. Then I'm going to play Coleman Hughes and Bill Maher talking about that a little bit. And then we're going to move on to a very important topic. Larry Alex Totten is going to be talking about Saul Alinsky's number one rule, which is divide and conquer. And I think that Sunny is attacking Coleman because that one rule must stand. We can't have somebody talking about unity when we need everybody to be at each other's throats. Don't forget about the new channel I got, Coach Colin Media. Hit that subscribe button on there. Now let's get into the first clip. Rogan, ladies and gentlemen, let's go.
New book, End of Race Politics, Arguments for Colorblind America.
Yeah, I saw you on The View.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's been overwhelming my past couple days.
Yeah, is that annoying?
No.
No?
No, I mean, it's just, when I was on there, I really had no idea how it was going to land with the audience. So I just went in there, did my thing. I had no idea what to expect. I didn't know who Sunny Hostin was. I actually still really don't know. So I wasn't expecting necessarily for her to kind of try to ambush me in that way and attack my character in that way. And I responded to it in the moment, as I do. And I didn't expect it to go as viral as it did, but I think it arguably went more viral than anything I've ever done. It's hard for me to totally tell, but I've just got people messaging me almost nonstop for like 4 days afterwards.
Well, it is the show that people love to hate.
Yes, that's true. That's true.
They get so much hate watching and hate watching viral clips of them saying ridiculous things. I mean, it is a rabies-infested hen house.
and at the same time, it seemed like the most interesting part was their audience seemed to be on my side.
Yes.
And that's their audience.
Yes. Well, their audience is not really their audience. Their audience is a group of people they bring in to watch television shows. You know, I don't know if you've ever seen audiences before for TV shows, but a lot of them are paid. They're paid to be there. So, because they have to guarantee that there's going to be people there. So there's services that you hire. And when a show gets really, really popular, you know, like Letterman or something like that, obviously it has its own fan base.
Right.
And those people will try to get tickets before anybody else does. And in that case, they probably don't need to use a service anymore. They just get actual fans. But arguably, like the fans, the real fans of The View that are like, oh, these ladies are on point. Most of those people can't leave the house. Like they're probably immobile.
Right. Because their mom's taking their kids to school, and that's,
It's a very strange show, but it's fun to watch. It's just fun to watch them.
It's good entertainment.
Yeah.
Undoubtedly.
Well, they're just, you know, it's interesting because I think Sunny is very intelligent, but she's ideologically captured.
Right.
You know, I think the other ones, there's a couple of the other ones, don't have to name any names, are just very dull-minded. But I think Sunny's not one of them. I think she's smart but captured.
Sure,
And
I think she came into it with an agenda.
Of course.
You know.
They do everything with an agenda.
Yeah.
You know.
She came into it, it seems, really wanting to paint me as someone that has been co-opted by the right wing.
Yeah.
And I don't know how much research she had done into me. She claimed to have read my book twice, which is almost certainly not true.
Yeah,
because she was totally missummarizing.
When did the book come out?
February.
The odds are very low.
Very low, right? Because
very low.
Think of how many guests they have on their show,
how much time she has, family obligations.
Yeah.
What is it, about 250 pages?
Something like that. Yeah.
I don't think so.
Yeah,
but I mean, I might be wrong. I mean, do you have an audiobook available?
I do. Yeah, I read it myself.
Maybe she did it at double speed.
Yeah.
Twice.
So I sounded like Ben Shapiro the whole time. Have you ever listened to Ben Shapiro on like 1.5 times?
No, it's got to be ridiculous.
Yeah, it's insane.
Ben Shapiro should debate Destiny.
Oh my God. I know they did. They did debate.
Did they really?
Yeah, absolutely. They
About
did.
what?
Who hosted them? Was it Lex?
Was it?
I could be getting that wrong, but I think Lex hosted a debate like 2 months ago.
Well, he had a debate a couple of months ago, but it was a Palestine.
No, that was separate.
Debate.
I also saw that.
Oh,
that was like the 4 hours. Yeah, there you go.
That guy debates everybody.
Yeah,
he's so ridiculous. He does a Wikipedia search and then just starts going after things like he's an expert.
Yeah,
it's just it was a fun time. It's a really fun time.
Yeah,
a fun time for watching people flail.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, but I think the problem with that show is that show has this very specific ideological bubble in which they operate in. Mm-hmm. And they always bring on a token conservative woman and they yell over her and silence her. And, they did that with Meghan McCain and they did that with what is that other blonde woman from Survivor? Do you remember her, Jamie? She was always yelling. I mean, it's just, it's a bizarre show.
So we had 8 minutes and America's approach to race, pretty big topic. Pretty important topic.
I think the way before you start, I think the way you described it is brilliant, and the way we should all look at it. Of course, you're going to see race. The idea of being colorblind is ridiculous, but treat everybody. They're just human beings. Yeah, everybody's just individuals.
That's right.
That's what we should all hope for.
That's right. Yeah, there's been this common phrase, "I don't see race," that's equated with colorblindness. And the point of my book is I want to say, get rid of that. Of course, we see race. Certainly in America, in the West, you could argue about whether children really see race, but past a certain point, we see race. Point is not to pretend you don't see it. It's to say, you're a white guy, I'm a black and Hispanic guy. We notice that. We're not going to pretend it's not there. But whenever it matters, I'm going to try to treat you like an individual based on your personal qualities. And we're going to ask the government to do the same. Get race out of public policy. If you want to help disadvantaged people, do that on the basis of class.
100%. And understand that when you see these incentives that are put into corporations, these are methods of control. And that's what's going on when you see things like DEI initiatives. You're not really making the world a better place.
Right.
You're just allowing these financial institutions to enact control over corporations. And it's a really shifty, weird way they're doing it by making it seem like they're trying to make the world a better, more equal place. And then there's some people who are good intentioned but have a very narrow perspective and a very limited amount of information that they're operating under that will try to pretend that these things are overall good, are net positive.
Right. And Sunny Hostin may be one of those people, but, so we had 8 minutes to deal with this topic on one of the biggest platforms in the country, and especially an audience that isn't my typical audience. If anything, the Views audience is really who needs to hear my message the most. And Sunny decided to take up a few minutes of that precious 8 minutes and attack me as someone who's been co-opted by the right and someone who's a charlatan. And
did she use the term charlatan?
She did. And it's funny because I actually didn't notice it in real time. I kind of went in one ear and out the other. But
how did she say it?
She said something like, a lot of people in the black community, implicitly herself included, think that you've been co-opted by the right and that you're a charlatan.
Oh wow.
Yeah. And I explained to her I've only voted twice, both for Democrats, Hillary and Biden. Very open to voting for Republicans. So I'm a political independent, and I'm only young enough to have voted twice. I'm an analyst at CNN, and I write for the Free Press, which is Barry Weiss's. Yeah. And I'm independent in all of those endeavors. And I patiently explained that, and then basically asked her to go back to the topic that we're here to discuss.
Yeah, well, it's a dumb way of addressing a thing, and to immediately say that someone's been co-opted with no evidence whatsoever. There's nothing about anything that you say that seems right-wing. You're just objectively looking at these subjects and giving a very intelligent and measured opinion of them. That's not, and just because some people who happen to vote Republican may agree with you, that's a ridiculous statement that you're co-opted. I think you're probably one of the least co-opted people I've ever talked to. You're very open-minded, and you're very objective.
I try to be. I try to be.
Very much so, and you're going to see some of this rationale and common sense and patience, immense patience that this man has as well. You're about to see all of that on display. I will say, though, right off the bat, what people tend to do when she says, because you're going to see it in a second, when she says, people think that you're co-opted, that you're a pawn, she actually calls him a pawn for the right wing. That is a dismissive tactic. And how else that they do that is by calling people conspiracy theorists. That's another way to dismiss people. And then what I see a lot of people on the right do. Left-wing people, oh, what is that, a conspiracy? Oh, what is that, a conspiracy? That's what they do, right? And then a couple months goes by and all of a sudden that thing that was a conspiracy is now real, and then they forget about that and they move on, of course. But what I see people who are right-leaning tend to do, the common sense people tend to do, who are like on that side, they will bring up a term that is controlled opposition. You're controlled opposition. It's the exact same thing. Saying co-opted and conspiracy theorists is the exact same thing as saying you are controlled opposition. It's just a way to dismiss people who are saying things that are not quite what your side deems the proper narrative. I've seen it time and time again. You've seen it with Rogan. Anytime Rogan says something that is not towards what a lot of his audience thinks, he's controlled, man. How do you not know? How do you not know he's a Satanist, sold his soul? He's controlled opposition. I've seen the same thing happen to so many people. And it usually happens when they change their stance on something. That's what usually happens. They change their stance on something. Interesting. It's an I like to bring that up because a lot of people don't realize that, but that's all she's doing when she does this. Now, I don't know why. I uploaded this video yesterday, guys. I'm not sure what happened. Hit that subscribe button. Join that other channel. But I uploaded this yesterday, and for some reason it got blocked worldwide. Now you might think, oh, well, that's what happens. But I've seen at least 12 other creators use the same clips. And for some reason there was no problem when they did it. Not sure why that is. Not sure. But anyway, let's do the first clip. This is where Coleman Hughes first gets attacked by Sonny. You know, it's very gradual, and then she ups it. Let's go.
When you say that socioeconomics picks out people in a better way than race, when you do look at the socioeconomics, you see the huge disparity between white households and black households. You see the huge disparity between white households and Hispanic households. So your argument, and I've read your book twice because I wanted to give it a chance, your argument that race has no place in that equation is really fundamentally flawed, in my opinion.
Well, there's two separate questions. One is whether each racial group is socioeconomically the same. That I agree with you. They're not.
Yeah, they're not, and the stats show that.
But yeah, of course, I agree with that fully. The question is, how do you address that in the way that actually targets poverty the best?
Great.
And what Martin Luther King wrote in his book, Why We Can't Wait, is he called it, we need a Bill of Rights for the disadvantaged. And he said, yes, we should address racial inequality. Yes, we should address the legacy of slavery. But the way to do that is on the basis of class. And that will disproportionately target blacks and Hispanics because they're disproportionately poor. But it will be doing so in a way that also helps the white poor, in a way that addresses poverty as the thing to be addressed.
That part is true, but as you are a student of Dr. King, I'm not only a student of Dr. King, I know his daughter, Bernice, right? So I'm going to get to my question.
Go ahead, go right ahead.
Just so you know, she doesn't get to her question. She just keeps on kind of poking at Coleman. She doesn't fully have a question at all. She just decides to go at him. But the first thing I noticed with this, let me show you another clip right now. But the first thing I noticed with this is that she's really trying to enforce the whole black versus white. Coleman's saying, you know, there's a whole class of people that are very disadvantaged, that are living in poverty. I know that for a fact. I grew up around more white poor people than poor black people. And it wasn't that like all the black people were like living in mansions. It's just that there is a community of poor white. And listen, even, and I know some people won't believe this, even very, very, very poor Jewish people, poor I'll say regular white people, poor black people. We were just poor. It was just a community of poor people, you know? So Coleman's saying to focus on that so he can help everybody out of that situation. And she keeps harping this, you know, but you see the disparity between the blacks and the white. Believe you me, and I know, I don't care where her beginnings are. If she was poor at one point in her life, she's very out of touch. Because to think that when you're in a poor community, that the white poor people somehow have it better than the poor black people is just crazy. Crazy. When I was a kid, we were all stealing clothes. We were all stealing chips and candy and food. We were all doing it. All of us together. And we were running around the back of wherever we were and eating them in some back alley. We were all doing it. There was no difference. The poor white people weren't rich. It doesn't work like that. But let's get into the next clip where she does really take aim at Coleman. So it goes from focusing on his fundamentally flawed argument, which it's not, to actually pointing a finger at him.
And so your argument for color blindness, I think, is something that the right has co-opted. And so many in the black community, if I'm being honest with you, because I want to be, believe that you are being used as a pawn by the right and that you're a charlatan of sorts.
He's not a Republican.
So how do you...
He's never voted for a Republican.
You've said that you're a conservative.
No.
No, you did. You actually said that in the podcast that you did 2 weeks ago.
I said I was a conservative.
Yes, you did. So, but my question to you is, how do you respond to those critics?
Okay, let's give it. Let him answer. Yes.
First thing I think it's very important. The quote that you just pointed out about doing something special for the Negro. That's from the book Why We Can't Wait that I just mentioned.
Yes.
A couple paragraphs later, he lays out exactly what that something special was, and it was the Bill of Rights for the Disadvantaged, a broad class-based policy.
But he also says you must include race.
No, he didn't. He says it's
Yes, he does.
Okay, well, everyone should go read the book Why We
The book is called Why We Can't Wait. Why would the guy, MLK, that we all know, that everybody looks at like, wow, that guy was something special, the man who focused on, everybody knows the quote, content of character, not the color of skin. Why would he want to make something for the disadvantaged, which she agreed with, that is a real thing that he really wanted to lay out? Why would he then say, and you must focus on race? Why would the guy who is trying his damnedest and died doing it, trying to get people to not focus on race, then say, when you help everybody, make sure you focus on race? It just makes no sense. Now, to get into more of her dishonesty, read the book twice. They touched on that. She didn't read that book twice. She didn't read it once. She doesn't like Coleman. She didn't read his book. She's taking talking points. And then she brings up many black people. This is all tactics they use so much. She says many black people feel. Do you think she polled a bunch of black people? I don't. I think she's just saying a bunch of things in order to just say what she thinks. There's many experts that say, polls show, things like that. People always use those to kind of enforce their opinion, right? So many black people believe. I don't think that's true. I think many black people don't know who Coleman Hughes is. He's a very intelligent man, but he's not this monumental figure that everybody knows. So I don't think there's many black people that think that. Then she's saying, what about your critics? Then she's saying that you said you're a conservative, which I research podcasts. That's what I do. I watch podcasts. There are no podcasts where he says, I'm a conservative. He has podcasts where he says, I could be seen as conservative by some people with the things that I say and the things that I believe. He has many people who are conservative agree with what he has to say, but he himself has never said, I'm conservative. And her point, funny how she can reference books, reference paragraphs, but then when it came to the podcast, she didn't even mention who the podcast was. Was it Joe Rogan? Was it Chris Williamson? Who was it? What podcast did you see him on? It's because it's not true. It's just very interesting that she would do that and then call him a charlatan. Again, just trying to discredit him, It's just like me, if I was talking to you and I go, well, you're talking to me a little aggressively and so many people say that you're racist. So I kind of understand why you're being like this to me. It's like, that's not true. But I'm just trying to disarm you. I'm trying to just be like, I'm trying to bring up race and I'm trying to bring up that you're racist. And I'm trying to just back it up with many people. Oh, so many people. Yeah, other people. Yeah, I can't mention them. I don't want to mention them. Let's not focus on that, but let's just keep dirty tactics this lady on The View is using. Now, Coleman didn't really get a chance to really get into what he wanted to talk about. Again, like he said on the Joe Rogan episode, he only had 8 minutes. Sonny took up at least half of that time with their back and forth. So here's him with Chris Williamson, just talking about it a little more calmly. Let's get into this.
think about the state of race in America now? What's your meteorological weather report?
Yeah, so the reason I wrote this book is that this idea of colorblindness, which means you try to treat people without regard to race. I see, obviously, that you're a quote unquote white guy. You see that I'm a quote unquote black guy. But I'm going to treat you like Chris Williamson, knowing everything I know about you as an individual. And I ask you to treat me like Coleman Hughes, knowing everything you know about me. And we don't give weight to each other's races when we treat each other. And my book is advocating not just for that, but also advocating for getting race out of public policy. In America, we have all kinds of policies that use racial discrimination explicitly. And people have various reasons for this: to fight racism, to combat the legacy of slavery, and so forth. And in my book, I want to argue instead for a colorblind philosophy. Let's get race out of public policy. If we want to correct for disadvantages, let's do that on the basis of socioeconomics and class. And in my view, this is a much healthier path towards the ideal of a colorblind society. It used to be, common sense on the left and in liberal circles that that's what you wanted to do. In the mid 60s, you had Martin Luther King writing and speaking to this effect. But in the past 50 years, and particularly in the past 10, with the explosion of Black Lives Matter, social justice, wokeness, DEI, critical race theory, whatever you want to call it, this idea of colorblindness has come under attack as naive at best or as white supremacist at worst. So in the book here, I really try to rescue this idea of colorblindness because I think it's the wisest way to actually navigate a multiracial, multi-ethnic society in the long run.
Explain to me the difference between being colorblind and not seeing race, because that kind of became a meme. I don't see race became a meme. What is there a difference?
I think there's a huge difference because the truth is we all see race, right? When someone says, I don't see race, I understand what they're getting at, but it's actually a lie. It's not true. I could, everyone watching this can see that you're white and that I'm not, right? So when people say, I don't see race, they're putting up a very convenient target for the critics of colorblindness to say, look, they're just being naive. They're pretending not to see race. And it allows people to dismiss the deeper philosophy of colorblindness without giving it a fair consideration. So in my book, I advocate that people just stop saying that. It gives enemies of colorblindness far too easy a target. What you should say instead is, I try to treat people without regard to race. Now that doesn't roll off the tongue quite as quickly, but it's much closer to the truth. It's more accurate. And so, I think we should all admit that we see race, all admit that we are theoretically capable of being racist. All of us are. So this is not a book that's telling you to be naive or to pretend that racism doesn't exist. It's a book that says we should treat people without regard to race, both in our personal lives and in our public policy.
So there he was explaining it very well. And I think the main thing is that you just got to reword it, because when you say you don't see race, again, he said everything there, but it's obvious that you do see race, because I never treat people based on their race. I never have. Never, not once. I just don't do that. And that's in my dealings at work. If I'm working with people, if I'm, a customer of a place, I never see it as a racial thing. And I can always feel if someone else does, and it's happened mainly with like black people, where they'll try to relate on something that, like, hey, you saw, LeBron, he put up some numbers. I'm like, oh, I've never watched sports before. I've never done that. And they're like, for real? I'm like, yeah, no, I don't know anything about basketball. And it's a little awkward, but yeah, I never treat people that way. And, I think I was gifted with an experience of leading this life of working these for me, they were terrible jobs of just working in big factories with poor conditions, poor pay, of course, and having to work really hard, order picking, forklift, and those were the better days when you can actually, use a thing, lift trucks and cherry pickers, and I've been certified on everything. But the main thing that would always happen in those atmospheres was we all understood that this guy's Filipino, this guy's black, this guy's white, this guy's old, this guy's young, but it's all of us together. And, doesn't sound that good, but we would look at management, the people in the office. We'd be like, that's the real dividing line. And I guess that was kind of classism, because we would look at it like they don't treat us right and they don't look at us properly. And it doesn't matter if you're white or you're black. It's like they don't treat us well. They don't pay us well. And it was a bad situation, but at least it gave me the idea that, and just my growing up, that it doesn't matter if you're black or white or Asian or anything. If you're poor, you're poor. You're just poor, and you're not really focusing on those things that much. You have the odd exception, but you're more, when you go to work and you're working with a black guy and a white guy and an Asian guy, and you're a white guy, you're gonna love the black guy. If the black guy's working hard, you're not gonna be like, oh well, I guess. You're gonna be like, I love Donnell. He's the best when he comes in. And you might look at the white guy who's lazy and be like, man, when Chris comes in, it's the worst thing in the world, man. I can't work with that guy. I'm working with Donnell. I'm not working with Chris today. No, keep him on that side of the factory. You really do. You grow up different when you're poor. You grow up seeing things a little clearer. Let's get into this next clip. This is where they're talking about something I found very interesting that we can liken to today, and Coleman actually does. Riots were the thing that broke up the movement of looking at things with a moving towards a colorblind society. Very interesting. Let's listen.
To me about this abandonment, the conversation around class and this prioritization of race instead, because, classic left-leaning policies were about class. They weren't about race.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So during the civil rights movement, the policy of the civil rights movement, and anyone can read this in Martin Luther King's book, Why We Can't Wait, from the mid-60s. He says, here's the plan. We are going to have a anti-poverty program. He called it the Bill of Rights for the Disadvantaged. It's going to benefit the black poor. It's going to benefit the white poor alike on the basis of class, though it will benefit black people disproportionately because black people are disproportionately poor to begin with. But it won't be a race-based policy. It'll be a class-based policy. And we're going to get rid of Jim Crow, get rid of all race-based policies, and proceed with a kind of war on poverty and disadvantage that is colorblind in nature. Everyone agreed. For a brief moment, the elites, at least, the people in power, agreed, passed the landmark civil rights legislation of the 1960s, which made it the case that, for instance, my grandfather and grandmother could vote, and so on and so forth. Sit wherever they wanted on a bus, go to whatever restaurant they wanted, go to whatever school they wanted. And then in the late 60s, there was a series of destructive riots, over 150 riots in American cities around this issue of race and policing. And what happened is everyone who had just agreed to this colorblind principle lost faith in it, because they said, if we just agreed on colorblindness, passed all this legislation, how come there's all this rioting? Clearly, we must need to do more. We must need to do something else. And the only thing that I can compare this to in your and I, the lifetime of most of your listeners, if not all of your listeners, is the summer of 2020 when George Floyd died in Minneapolis, and you had riots all over the country in most American cities, and you had politicians and just everyday people feeling enormous pressure to put racial identity on the front burner, to do and to do all kinds of things. Every elite institution was in some way trying to promote Black people to high levels of authority, to show how much they cared about Black people, to require Black people to be on the boards of publicly traded companies, to change the categories that the Grammy Awards operate under, just everything, right? Everyone felt this enormous pressure to quote unquote center race. Something very similar happened in the late 60s, and that's where the impetus for race-based affirmative affirmative action came from, and the whole suite of race-based policies that have become normal in American society. So that's really what happened with the pivot away from colorblindness.
It's
very, very interesting stuff. And that stood out to me more than anything, that because we're talking about class, doing things based on class, helping the disadvantaged. But what we're really talking about in that sense is a sense of unity between everybody in, the lower class, middle class. We're talking about this unity of everybody gets pulled out of this situation, It's funny that while that was happening in the 60s, late 60s, as he said, a bunch of riots broke out. And then it stopped that. And again, I'm going to go with the term unity. So while unity was slowly happening, not saying there was a utopia or anything, but while that was in its infancy of happening, all of a sudden, all these riots broke out. And then that got thrown out the window. And it's going to make a little more sense when I play the clip of Larry Alex Totten speaking, because he talks about divide and conquer. And then he talks about something called, I don't want to mess up what he's talking. I'll let him tell it. It was something about not transracial. So let me, you know what? I'm just going to jump right over to that clip. I want to play that clip right now, because this is very interesting to me. So this is Larry Alex Totten talking about divide and conquer, one of Saul Alinsky's #1 rules. Let's go.
The tactic of divide and conquer is to do exactly the opposite. I mean, it is the opposite of the traditional American view of the American melting pot. That no matter what your ethnicity, whatever your family's background, your family is from Italy and mine is from England. You're black and I'm white. You're Catholic and I'm Protestant. We could still say we hold these truths self-evident. That we could come together and say, this is worth fighting for, it's worth preserving, it's worth dying for. Their goal is the opposite of e pluribus unum. It is out of one, many. It is to go in exactly the opposite direction, to fragment society, to turn people against one another, so that they could then present themselves as the solution to the problem they've created. And by the way, this is the tactic of everyone who aspires to dictatorial power. You create a problem, and then you present yourself as the solution to that problem. Yeah, sitting off camera over here is my son Zachary, who is, keeps his ear to the ground on these issues, and he's saying that I should say something to you about intersectionality and what intersectionality is. I've discussed that in another podcast, and yet it's worth repeating here. Intersectionality comes from Antonio Gramsci, the aforementioned Italian Marxist theorist, to some extent Georg Lukács, and that is that they saw that Marx said we divide society between the haves and the have-nots, between the peasant classes, the workers, the proletarians in Marx speak, and the capitalists, the bourgeoisie, the people in power. And as it was guys like Gramsci who said, that's not working in America. And the reason it's not working in America is because the average worker can advance. If he works hard, little luck, saves his money, he might get promoted. He might move up. I mean, this is the American dream. I mean, it's Elon Musk. Think about it. Elon Musk came to the United States, and now he's the richest man in the world, or at least one of the richest men in the world. And he did it by working hard. He understands what makes America great, because if you've not spent time in another country, you might not understand that in some countries, it isn't about how hard you work. Somebody can come and with force of arms, take what you have in a moment. And it definitely happens in Africa. And in his home country of South Africa. South Africa, as I've said, is a fascinating country. I've been there. It is not a great country. And what is going on there with the farmers, by the way, who are being driven off, white farmers who are being driven off their land, murdered as their farms are seized. You can't get ahead in a society like that. I mean, unless you're one of the people who's stealing from everyone else. And so intersectionality is the idea, okay, we need to divide society, not just between haves and have-nots, but we need to divide it now this way. and that is between people groups. We divide it between, so haves and have-nots isn't working in America, but white versus black, that might work. Men against women might work. We divide people, and it's how you end up with this woman saying, you're not allowed to come on my timeline without asking me, did you pick up? She said, you asked me, Lord? She says, I'm to be addressed as Lord. Wow. She says white people are to talk to her that way. And it's because she has been stoked, she's been manipulated, whether she knows it or not, that latent hate that resides in all of us, and that we should all beat down like whack-a-mole. Whenever you sense that coming up into your heart, you need to beat that down. But she didn't. She gave it vent. She, it's kind of like Lord of the Rings. She caressed it until it just has taken over her life, and now she's making stupid videos like this. So that's intersectionality. Intersectionality is the dividing of society in as many ways as possible, atomizing it so that every difference is accentuated and people are turned against one another.
So, yeah, that's what I was trying to get at. Intersectionality, right? Because if you focus on the haves and have-nots, then your focus is actually in the proper space. But that's good for everybody, right? The disadvantaged. But it's not good for the people, we'll just say the elite, demon elite, as I call them. It's not good for them. Because now they see that there's only a few of them and there's billions of us. So they're like, oh, we can't have that happen for too long. And yes, some might move up and some might be complacent because, they know that they could get rich and become one of us, but it's not likely with the system that we have in place. But then a better way, like he said, black versus white, that's good. Let's have the black people feel like it's the white people's fault. Let's have the white people feel like the black people are trying to replace them. Let's try to have the men, or let's try to make it feel like the women. Make the women feel like the men are the ones holding them down. Black people look at white people, they're the ones holding them down. And then all the other races that end up coming into this nation, they'll just pick a side and we'll just have it like that. And we'll just keep doing that. And then that started to wear off. Well, then let's just make it so we can just take this whole group of people who have, gender issues and preferences. We'll just put them all together and we'll make it seem like, white people are the problem. And black people will identify with them because they've already felt like they've been oppressed by those people. And that'll work. Intersectionality, just cutting it up into as many things as possible. It's interesting. But again, going back to what I was talking about before, what Coleman brought up, just the fact that riots broke out and then all of that was just dashed aside. The proper way of viewing things was pushed aside after these riots. And, the way he likened it to George Floyd. Yeah, it's kind of the same thing. And then after George Floyd, what have we been doing? We've been focusing heavily on race, heavily on gender, heavily on we've just been focused in on that. Interesting. I had to skip ahead and show you guys that. Here, I'll show you the last clip. It'll be Bill Maher, Coleman Hughes. Coleman, I just wanted to have him calmly talk about what he feels. So let's go here.
So what's the difference? Where do we draw the line here? Fighting racism, and your book is fighting the politics of race. Talk about the politics.
Right.
What's the difference between fighting racism and the politics of racism?
Right. So racism, as defined by Martin Luther King, the civil rights movement, judging people on the basis of their race rather than their character and so forth, that's not what my book is against fighting. Obviously, we should all fight that, no matter who it's directed at. What my book is fighting is this ideology that really was born with critical race theory, the adult version of critical race theory in the 70s and 80s, and became more popular over the past 10 years, that equates whiteness with evil, equates blackness with a kind of moral superiority, stereotypes whole groups of people, says that your race is an essential part of who you are, and feels even that children need to be taught this from as young an age as possible, because they're born with the wrong attitude about race, and it needs to be sort of hammered out of them by separating white kids from black kids, from Hispanic kids, putting them in different corners of the room, as was done in my Columbia University orientation some 9 years ago. And that the way we're going to get to the kind of society we want is by focusing more and more on racial identity. In my book, I say this is nonsense. This is totally against the spirit of the civil rights movement, and that actually the wise principle is that we should try to treat people without regard to race, both in our personal lives and in public policy.
It's funny, I mean, that wouldn't have been controversial with any liberal 30 or 40, 50 years ago. I mean, that is what Martin Luther King said. What colorblind society? I mean, I thought we were all after that, and then we all weren't. And what changed?
Yes.
Well, going back to the clip that I just showed you of Larry Alex talking, I think intersectionality is what changed. And I think it was abruptly stopped by, a bunch of, late 60s, a bunch of riots abruptly stopped that from happening. Martin Luther King was taken away. Malcolm X was taken away. The voices were taken away. They were replaced by Al Sharpton and Jesse Jackson. And they've done nothing for the community for decades. They've only enriched themselves, as you see most of these elites doing, enriching themselves off of the struggles of everyone who's disadvantaged. So I think that's what changed. I think intersectionality had a big part to do with it. Because again, the haves and the have-nots, that's not what the haves want in terms of a focus. But black versus white, man versus woman, gay versus straight, trans versus cis, all of those things, that's fine. Because then that has us all fight amongst each other. Anyways, guys, like, subscribe, share, and let me know what you think in the comments of Coleman Hughes, what happened to him on The View, the things he has to say, and is a colorblind America a thing that's possible? Let me know in the comments. I'm out.